It is 7 o'clock sharp. I want to call this meeting at the 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force to order. I'm Paul Bohm, the chair. We'll try to get out of here before the streets are flooded, before the skies open up, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to shuffle the agenda out around a little bit. Bart is going to join us about 8. We'll see how the updates go, and I think Cord and Pam have some interesting updates on the legal work stream. So let's save that piece till the Cord arrives. Is that okay, Pam?
I want that. I really-
Okay.
I want us to be a team on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So couple of business items. We have minutes and the annual report input. I've received no input from you guys. Does that mean the minutes are perfect and nobody had any comments in the annual report?
I didn't read it until 6 o'clock tonight, so.
Oh, okay. If you have comments tonight, that's fine. We let's do the minutes first. So
I miss
So-
Becky.
these are the minutes of December 12th. Thank you, Rich. The December 12th meeting. Has everybody had a chance to
I did.
look at those?
I didn't, again, I'm sorry, my apologies, but I will
Okay.
abstain.
Are there any comments on the minutes? Questions, comments?
I was okay with it. So move approval of the minutes.
You making a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, let's do the roll call vote. Kurt. Aye or
Aye. Aye.
David, Rich,
Aye.
Carl,
Aye.
Pam.
I abstain, but I must say, the minutes I have read are fabulous and I'm.
Aye. All aye. So the minutes are so approved.
I'm curious, Rich, do you go back and listen to the recording of the meeting before you finalize your?
It's my fallback, but so far I keep working from my notes. I mean, I guess, not that I don't love hanging around with you guys, but you know, I don't like replays even of shows that I enjoy watching.
Well, good for you.
So the process, and Rich sends me his minutes and they're 98%. So I just add some clarifying comments or edits or just things that make it a little clear, but they're terrific. I thank you again. So next order of business is the annual report. So all the chairs of the task forces and committees were asked to provide input to the annual report by January 19th, I believe the date is. So I drafted this up from combination of areas, and the only thing I haven't concluded yet is if and what photographs I might include here. I think Pam Rockwell's.
She sent you one.
Sent a
I may have one or two. I had my camera with me.
Yeah, the shot I had here was the oblique shot from 2021 that we used for the previous report. Just a nice shot. Any comments, critique, or anything on the report as written?
Is there any chance to comment after tonight or not? I'm sorry, I've got an extremely
You said you do on the 19th.
busy.
Well, we have to vote for approval tonight, because the next meeting is on the 30th.
Okay.
Then have to approve or not. I can't table it.
Okay, that's what it's like. I just had a very busy few weeks.
Yeah, my reading was fast, obviously, but I did.
We can look at it, you look at it now.
Good summary.
Anybody who read it,
Yeah,
thinks it's okay?
I thought it was a good.
It is a summary. It has no opinions, it's just our purpose and our work and where we're heading, and it restates the charge of the task force. That we've been meeting, that we've been funded by the select board, to enhance the work on the legal work stream and on the risk work stream. So it kind of gets everybody up to date on what we're doing. It's a bit of a synopsis from the public forum. Do I have a motion to approve the annual report as drafted?
So moved.
Second,
Okay, roll call vote. Carrie,
aye.
Pam,
I'm gonna say aye.
Carl,
Aye.
Rich, David.
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
Paul, I approve. Thank you. The only thing that isn't finalized are the photographs. If you have any photographs you think might be useful to the public and as an enhancement, it's not mandatory, but it's always nice to have those. Please send those to me in the next few days. You don't have to approve the photographs, just the text. So, okay, great. So the next item of business is the work stream updates. Just, as a general sense, we haven't met in about a month. As we go around, just not only what you're learning, but how's it going, any snags, what you're running into, what the major questions are. I know the work streams are pretty much advanced. And we do have the task of figuring out how it all comes together, but we're still, according to the schedule that is still active, we have about a quarter to kind of figure out how to start putting things together. At some point in the first quarter, I'm going to draft an outline for the report. And, as a structure of how it might come together, and we can kind of tear that apart. But I've been thinking about how the pieces might be presented. It may not be the way you want to do it, but I think as a straw man, I'm going to do that. Probably sometime in February, so maybe the second meeting in February, we'll take a look at an outline. A real early outline. So we can start thinking not only about how to write it, that comes later, but how the pieces might be presented and integrated. That's one way of thinking about it. Somebody has a better idea how to.
No, I think that's a good idea. The other piece of this is the substantive part of it, which is discussing when do discussions happen on our, whether we're being, I hate the word position, but what our viewpoints are on the ultimate questions. I mean, how does one structure that conversation?
Right, so the outline that I would structure would be clean of what the recommendation is, or the section recommendation, but it's sort of a, we've heard expert reports, it has what data we use, what the findings were, and then what our recommendations and conclusions were. How we come to consensus on what the conclusions are, I don't know yet. It kind of, it depends on, in my mind, it depends on the complexity of the data. What I would love to do is to present to the select board recommendations with either pathway to acquire or pathway to, not to acquire, so just so they have sort of a template in front of them, as opposed to a number of options. We still are not close to that stage, we're still data gathering it, but how we come, it's gonna be based on how clear the information is. Is it clear, is it ambiguous, especially on the legal side, does outside counsel have a recommendation, here's the preferred pathway for whatever. That would be great, as opposed to select board, who's option A or option B, that's a little bit more ambiguous. So can we come to that clarity? I don't know yet. But the more clarity we have on any of this, the easier it's gonna be to integrate it. Anybody have any other comments on early thoughts on pulling this together? I mean, we're really early.
I'm hesitating because Court and I have talked about this, but in our digging, one of the things that I, for example, have experienced is a sense that there are more tentacles to this than merely a binary, forgive me, but a binary approach of acquisition versus non-acquisition. And I'm hesitating because I want Court to be here, but I think we need to think about whether it is that binary. I mean, are there other approaches? And, we've talked about zoning, which is kind of out there, but there are, for example, although I know it's the policy of the EPA not to have a site be partially purchased or acquired, that's simply a policy. It is not legally required. So that's an example of, should we be thinking along those lines? Another example might be, and this is something I stumbled upon just with the legal research, is the role of the state. And, thinking way outside of the box, you know, my view is this is a very, very serious question because an NPL site is an NPL site, you know, and this is a very unique NPL site. Doesn't have your usual responsible parties, it's, you know, there's just so much history here and the content of the site is peculiar, to say the least. And there is a sort of overlay of state responsibility. And there are times when states and local governments collaborate. It's way outside of the box, but, you know, I had never thought of that. Is there, you know, an opportunity here to not just think about the town having this, I would say, problem and opportunity, because it's both a problem and an opportunity, but also, you know, other kinds of things we haven't even thought about.
Yeah.
And again, I want, and the court's gonna raise it, I think, later, but I wanna just toss that out, that we gotta be sure we are not. The question really is, what should this town do with a 46-acre NPL site? That's the question. And, you know, but the charge is narrowly presented, arguably, but I just toss that out first.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I think it's a really good comment. I think it is non-binary in a couple of senses. I'd like it. I don't know if you're talking more about process or sort of the end game, because if you're saying we need more to gather more information, is this possible? Is that possible? Is some other possibilities? I'm not talking about negotiations.
No.
We're gonna have to talk with the parties, whether it's a state or EPA, is this a possibility?
Yeah.
If not, you put that aside. You're pulling. You're saying some interesting possibilities. We don't even know if they're possible.
Yeah.
But let me finish.
Sorry.
But I'd like to get the information to find out if that's possible or not. So we can come to what I'm calling a binary decision that we acquire or don't acquire. The other non-binary is if the town partners with somebody to acquire it. You know, that's something that, you know, so that's not a pure, the town acquires it or doesn't. You know, the town acquires it with some other partnership, which we've talked about a long time ago. So it isn't purely non-binary, but I think what you're describing is some very important information gathering that we need.
Also, I would say, if you would allow me, I think it also goes to the question of the charge itself, which is written in a rather binary fashion, but it may be because, as was the case with me, I simply had no idea what I was looking at here, you know. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm beginning to see this thing. And the only example I come, because we've talked about private partnerships and that sort of thing, I think it's a little, at least on the margins, but I mean, the one that really hits me is the role of the state and the state's ability to help protect us and all that. But I don't want to go any
Okay,
further,
yes,
but
so
thank you for.
I'd like to go back,
Yeah.
let's pick this up during the legal discussion,
Yeah.
because one thread is this information gap. We, you know, Mina's doing his research, but to your point, we're gonna need some more information to see whether certain things are feasible or possible. We're gonna need that, we're gonna need that before we make a recommendation, so when and from whom we get the information, we're gonna have to talk
I mean,
about.
does this resonate with others? I guess.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to say is that we had one preliminary discussion with Mass Development who said, yeah, we could be interested either as the acquirer and then the developer, or as a contractor to the town to supervise a multifaceted development process if the town acquired. So I think you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
And I've asked Skio, I think we need another meeting higher up with them to see, you know, just what do they mean when they say we can help you and how interested are they? And it may be appropriate to include you in court, I'm thinking, since, you know, there will be issues around, you know, what does it mean if the state were to acquire it, or if we were to acquire it and contract with Mass Development to be the agency that makes it happen.
If you're already talking with two people, with people from two different groups, should it be a discussion for the full committee?
Maybe, yeah.
Invite them to the meeting?
Yeah, I mean, the
So
other
you
thing I
gotta
just
take
wanted
the
to-
I mean, I don't think we're at the stage of inviting them to the whole committee. I mean, maybe the thing to do, just as we've done with our notes today, is share what we learn, and then if the committee thinks, oh, this is a state avenue we want to explore in more depth, then have them come here and talk with us before.
I think I know that Cat West has, this is, put the idea of having a workshop. There may be a series of workshops on different topics that may be part of a formal meeting where they invite them. Again, this is the workshop form, or maybe outside of this, but I do think that it's, as pulling things together, to your point, Rich, about, the legal issues and the development issues come together, that we probably have to have an open meeting in a workshop format and get the right people here, but,
If I may, can I just respond to just on that point? I think it's clear to me that the legal ramifications for what you're doing are gonna be interesting. And I think that one of the things that we're coming to is a sense of the need for town council to be very much aware and involved in any of the kinds of things that start to touch on a relationship with the state, because all these things tumble
Yeah.
into, and I think so. I'm very much, supportive of your idea of, thinking this stuff through that way.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think another issue that sort of hangs over us is how important is the site for the town's future facility needs? Because if because of the town's long-term facility needs and the size of the site, and it's not the best location for everything, but size, that it wants to have it to address future facility needs, that could be a driving factor in
Absolutely.
the decision to acquire it, so.
Yeah.
And we're not gonna have an answer for that by October, but it's a contingency that the board select board have to think about.
it's a really good conversation, it bears on how things are coming together. I just, I want to try to explain what I'd like my role to be. I'm sort of the conductor here, trying to make sure that things are moving. You guys are doing all your work, but it has to come together. And I'd like to help you to conduct the various pieces, because they all gonna have to come together. So I'm gonna keep trying to do that, and part of that, Pam, to our earlier, I need to be aware of what's going on, so I can conduct properly. That's my role as the chair. Usually the chair is, you convene a meeting, you approve the minutes. I'd like to help in being a conductor here, not an interferer, but, because we are getting to the point where within, I think in 2 or 3 months, we're gonna have to start getting more information, getting different groups of people together and explore some of these ideas. To your point, this is not binary. This is not the town acquires it. There are other possibilities. And then, Carl, to your point, you have, how important it is for the town to own the site from the use part as an asset part, it's not independent of what we're talking about here, so.
Yeah.
Good.
Can I just add one more? I mean, I know it's complicated and everything, but I think that the task force, at least from the legal stream, is very much dependent on and very actively listening to the client. The client is not the task force, the client is the town of Concord. And the lawyer for the town of Concord is the town council, as you all well know. And I think that one of the tricky things at this point too, on the legal stuff, and I credit Chris for all the work, and he knows much more than I will know ever on this stuff, but the need to carefully understand and deliver to the town information at the appropriate time. And that gets into the relationship with the town council and other, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I really think you've been very helpful, and it's a difficult area because it seems so off-putting in a way, but in many respects it's very important. And I think the only thing I'd say as a setup to that is that we have to remember that we have a town council, and on legal issues, the only person who helps us is that person who has an ethical responsibility to represent our interests. And none of these other entities have those responsibilities. SKIO doesn't, the EPA doesn't, the Justice Department, they actually have maybe potentially contrary interests. So we have to remember that there's a very special role that the town council plays here. And the town council also delivers for us the value of confidentiality when it's important, and the pre-deliberative abilities that we need to enjoy before we go public. So it's just important for us to remember that very key relationship and how it carries more in it than merely just, take it or leave it from the town council. But anyway, Chris, please.
Yeah, I mean, Pam is also kind of reiterating advice we've got from town council on sometimes the conversation can be sensitive and there's a need to proceed carefully. Town council's advised, we just need to be very careful at this stage of the meeting.
Well, okay. Are we not being, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure how that affects the operation of the task force. I mean, confidentiality, care, taking legal advice from town, town council. But he's a resource to us. The select board has asked us to make a recommendation using Nina as a resource. It's not Nina making a recommendation independent of the task force. It has to be brought together. I agree with everything you're saying, but I don't see how that is affecting the function of the task force. At some point, we may have to go into executive session if we're discussing things that are sensitive. Thus far, we haven't been there. I'm mindful of that. I think we all are. So, unless there's something new here, I think it's good that you're bringing all this out, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's not everything new. I mean, for example, I want to rely much more on the town council than I do on SKIO. SKIO is an interesting, wonderful resource, a very useful resource. SKIO is not, it can be, and is offering good service to us. Its interests are not always gonna, in the end, maybe end up being the same as ours. I mean, I'm not sure about that, but I think that we want to be reliant primarily on the town council for those things that are primarily of a legal nature.
There's 100% agreement that we rely on town council. It's his opinions we rely on, but that does not mean that we can't get useful information from other parties, including SKIO and EPA and whomever.
Absolutely.
We can- Let me just say,
Yeah.
this is come up before, we can listen. And we can say that's useful, and Mina can be there or not, and we ask Mina, what do you think about this information? And he can tell us what he thinks, but we are not gonna rely on any outside party on legal advice other than Mina. But we are gonna listen to people, right?
Oh, yeah, we are,
Right?
to the
We're gonna-
extent that it's
We're gonna
useful.
listen, because it's experience out there that we don't have, and even our town council doesn't have on multiple Superfund sites. We want to hear that. And we take it or leave it based on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all speaking the same language. I think it's good to get to articulate these things occasionally because there may be different, maybe.
Okay, so far I think we're all in agreement. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I just want to add a coda to this conversation. We will probably get to, acquire or not in various pathways and steps to make it less than binary along each pathway. And have questions we haven't answered yet. So we need to bear that in mind, this 1 year mission is going to be able to clarify a lot. But in the report that you'll draft, the to be determined, or whatever you want to call them, we need to mentally listen for that as we're all going about our business. What can't we answer yet? For example, reuse. And this comes from having talked to another community, Ashland, about the Diane's site. Their recommendation from town government to do something was met by the community saying, let's talk about how that fits into our mission statements and, the long-term plan, that kind of thing. So that's a post our recommendation dynamic that we have to leave open.
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you another example. We're not negotiating anything. With Mina's help, we are going to present to the select, let's assume the recommendations acquisition. I'm not saying it is. That is, Mina will present us, here's the pathway, but that pathway has to be negotiated. So to your point, none of it is clear. it's not done until it's done. We can say, here's the pathway, and then the next iteration of this, the select board would have to charge Mina to, after this task force is over, to negotiate this pathway. That's the big enchilada on sort of the uncertainty. Can this actually be executed? The reuse is another one. We can lay out, and I think these guys are gonna lay out certain, I'll call them hypotheticals, which are a little bit more pointed than the reuse committee, which would, you know, here's some things we hear from the town and here. So, but that's not done either until there's a planning stage or budgeting stage. So that there's a lot of uncertainty in our recommendations. We're gonna have to lay those out. Here are the recommendations, but here are the things that we're gonna recommend to the select board that needs to be done after we make our recommendations. That's gonna take a few years.
I've been thinking about it in the context of the risk assessment as material contingencies or assumptions and what validation needs to take place in the future to make sure that the assumptions we're making now actually match what's happening in the future in 2, 3, 5 years.
No,
Great.
only 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
About 23 to 25.
We're gonna get to that point, because I think, you guys and the risk work stream are going to rely in part or a lot on what Rue is doing.
Yep.
And what Rue is doing is doing a little time travel, right? They're gonna have to project in the future that at the end of 2028, this is what the site's gonna look like.
Yep.
And this is what the risk is gonna look like then. It's going to have to be,
And the ground surface
Well, some-
elevation is gonna be a certain,
there's some assurance and some due diligence that has to occur, that is actually occurring.
What are the mechanisms to assure us that what they're projecting has in fact happened before steps are taken? Right, exactly.
validation is how I've been thinking about it, validate all the assumptions we're making
Right.
now at some point in the future.
And that loops right back into the legal, the liability protections.
Yeah.
Because in order for the town to protect itself from future liability, it has to make sure that it's doing that due diligence to make sure that things are going according to plan. So this is a complex set of wheels that we're dealing with here.
And 2028 itself is not certain.
Yeah, oh, yes, it's not.
Obviously not certain, and that gets to.
That's the government, they always do stuff on time.
I'm sorry?
It's the government, they always do stuff on time.
Past budgets,
It's a reasonable, plausible plan based on, you know, now that the cleanup is actually occurring until it started. Right, after the consent decree, it didn't really, I mean, there were things done, but it really didn't start in 2019. Right, the consent decree, until that point, that, you know, EPA and the actions couldn't even lay out a timeline, and they're kind of trying to maintain that timeline. But you're right, it may not be.
Well, I was thinking not from the bureaucratic lethargy or whatever, but which I think is sometimes quite understandable, but, I'm thinking more about the discoveries that might occur on the site with respect, which they're already telling us is happening as they keep digging and digging, and they think they were done, but they're not done, all that, you know, so well, but that's what I meant more, is that the discoveries or the regulatory developments that will occur, or an administration, so many things can happen, and the one I was referring to most directly was the problem of uncertainty as to what's there and what remains to be cleaned up even. But I'm not you, so but I think, you know,
Well, there certainly will be surprises as they're doing the remediation. That's always the case. I mean, there's just a limit to the information you can get before you start going out and implementing the remedy.
So my advice to myself and to you is, let's not get hung up on all the complexities and uncertainties. Let's understand they're out there. And still try to get ourselves to a reasonable decision point. You know, if that's not the end of this year, we'll ask for more time. But, you know, we need to try to cut through this and plan. And then, David, you're right, this report's gonna have to say, here are the uncertainties. Here's our recommendation, but here's the things that have to happen afterwards.
It's the flag though.
Here's uncertainty. And even though a recommendation may be to acquire, the select board may say, well, the uncertainties are such that we're not really to live with those. So we're gonna wait. We're gonna wait a while.
And 5 years from then, they'll.
That
put
could
another
be,
committee.
that could be a reasonable response to the select board. We hear your recommendation, but we're not gonna take any action because of these uncertainties. We're gonna wait a year or two, and then we'll make a decision. That's a perfectly reasonable response to unacceptable uncertainty. And I'm not sure we're gonna be at that point. we're having a great philosophical discussion, none of which was on the agenda, but this is really healthy stuff.
One more, I think this is.
More philosophy, go ahead.
Structural, this is not philosophical, just structural. Are we aspiring to a consensus report, or are we aspiring to, like, in a legal, opinion, you might have dissenting views and majority views? I mean, have we come even to that? We talk about consensus, and I don't have a point of view on this, I really don't, but I think it's something eventually that we will want to understand, I guess.
Or separate concurrences.
Yeah, separate concurrences, exactly.
I would hope we'd have a consensus on at least the main line of the story. And then there may be cautions about other things, hesitations or questions you ask before you act upon it.
Yeah.
Or even after acquiring it, what you then do with it. And at what time and what speed and who's paying and all of that other kind of stuff.
We may have to negotiate amongst ourselves to reach a consensus in terms of that, just, I mean, but, that final motion, we may have to spend 2 months working on the final motion. I don't know, Pat, it's a good question, I think.
Such a wonderful news,
Imagine.
Just canceled my summer vacation.
Making motion and then one committee making motion to amend.
Given all the complexities, I can see us spending some time on coming to the consensus. If that would be my preference and probably all your preference, if we can't do that,
Right.
we're gonna take a vote and we'll have, I don't know if we'll have a dissenting, it's not the Supreme Court, a dissenting section or whatever. We're gonna take a vote. The select board doesn't come to consensus in everything they do.
No.
They have votes 3-2, 4-1. So, with everything else, let's table that.
No, I just want.
No, it's
one of the
great.
things that's out
Well,
there.
our, whatever our recommendation or recommendations are, doesn't come with it the authority to implement.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
And so we are advisory.
Yes.
That's our time. We can do,
Fortunately.
that's true. We give the advice and decisions in the hands of the town, the client, the select board. Okay, we're getting into the updates a little bit, so why don't we continue saving for legal to the end? Let's talk about risk. So I've included in the package a timeline that Drew gave Chris, I think, on the proposed schedule, and I don't know if you want to see that? That your name, should I put that up?
Yeah, sure, I think that'd be helpful.
Where's that? That's nice. Let's have that again.
I don't know if I'm sharing my screen or not.
You are,
I am sharing.
that's right.
Okay, everybody see this? Excellent. Okay, do you wanna,
Yeah, I can give a brief update. So we had a call with Rue in December, and we talked about their overall status, and they've received the data that they're expecting to receive from the site consultants. And I think they have a cutoff of January 15th, for any additional data that they're gonna be working with. And again, they're gonna be working with that data and then adding in the assumptions about post remediation conditions to have the data set that feeds into the risk assessment to estimate post remediation conditions. And I'd like to have a call with them in a couple of weeks just to go through the methodology in a little more detail. I think it was a little premature on the last call, but once they have gotten their arms around the data, they're working on really starting to do the risk assessment calculations and understanding their methodology to make sure it really ties into what we need from them. And then they're looking at having draft results in about a month, so February 15th, based on the schedule. So we'll provide feedback in the next month or two. I think we'll be ready to share with the full task force. So I'm predicting within 1 to 2 months, we'll have results that we can use to help guide the other various work stream efforts.
So this timeline finalizing draft report like in May and June. We will have sort of information before that. I mean, because this is when they have actually drafting their report. So, I mean, it's reasonable by like April timeframe that we know what their findings are.
That's what they projected based on their schedule. So it's in the next month, they'll have first cut of the results. And then another month or two to work in any comments that we have and then document it in the report a month after that. So I think about the end of Q2 is what they're looking at for the report, at least in draft format. And we haven't talked about the format of that report, but we'll need to start thinking about that.
And it's, one thing that's always, I'm scratching my head about it. How, they're doing a lot of review of the old data and the current data. But they're not doing a risk assessment based on the old data or the current data, are they? What's the target of their risk, what data are they going to be used for the risk assessment?
Only data that's remaining post remediation. So I think they're starting with like the full data set and then they're gonna exclude everything that goes away during remediation, if that makes sense. And so most of it's gonna be based on assumptions about what's left behind after remediation, which is essentially clean backup. That meets the cleanup goals.
So there could be assumed concentrations.
Yeah.
So, building A, I'm not building A excavation remediation is complete. But there's, my understanding that could be a data set that is actually a cleanup data set that they may have some data that is sort of final data.
And that's why I want to spend a little time with them to talk through those issues.
Yeah,
Now that I think have their arms around all the data, just area by area, how they're actually going to do the calculations and what it represents.
You mentioned clean fill, the groundwater conditions would be part of this, is that right, or no?
Only for vapor intrusion. They're assuming there's no potable water use at the site,
Oh,
just
so
based on
there's
the
no potable-
restrictions.
As long as you keep it without using it as a potable water source, you don't have an issue with.
There's no exposure route.
Yeah, there's no exposure. It's really just focused on the soil. The vapor is not expected to be an issue, but they're going to consider it anyway.
One of the things that I did ask them in our meeting, which.
you want to come close to the owl.
Which I agree was, felt kind of preliminary, was, there are all these hard numbers for what's happened so far. We talked about this at our last meeting. How do you quantify what will be? So the town's buying into what will be. The town is considering things after we hand it off to the select board on the what will be expectations. And there have to be some standards, data, projections, whatever, that are hard around the what will be. And I noted that to them and they agreed, and I defer to the experts on how they come up with that. But you can't go into the soil now and say what it will be 3 years from now. You can only go on the ROD and various projections, and their say on that is gonna be an important one for the town when all the risk questions come up. So how that gets quantified within the very quantified kind of work they're doing with existing data is an issue I put.
Yeah, and I think that gets into what I was calling material assumptions. They're gonna make a series of assumptions that, for a certain area, it meets cleanup goals for the chemicals that they're testing for. So that's gonna be a critical assumption, and based on that, they can calculate a risk.
And I think there's at least one example. What I know about the remediation of the building A area, which I may be misstating, Kara, but I think that's what is complete, or relatively complete. There's data from there they can use as an example of that cleanup goals are being met in certain areas. There won't be a lot of that by April, but
No,
there may be a bit of that,
Mhm.
which would be very helpful. As an example.
Oh, and I imagine this overlaps with legal, because the handoff can't happen until there are certain levels attested to on site. So 3 or 5 or however many years from now, when our recommendations have mushed through town meeting and all of that sort of stuff, somebody before the signing happens has to attest to the reality having been achieved of
right,
what they're projecting.
so they can go to the remedy completion report and look and say, okay, the levels are what they said they have to be to meet the risk level.
So down the road, there's somebody's
But
gonna,
apropos of our
Right.
recommendation,
right,
we have to have enough proof statements in the recommendation. That what Rue is saying and we're projecting is actually. Going to happen.
Right.
We have to have some proof statements and so have some of that. In here, we can't just say, we don't know any of it, we're just so based on assumptions, so.
I would say assurance statements, but same.
Yeah, it's either an example of an area that has been cleaned up or example of the methodology that
Yep.
the Maximus is using.
And what the legal
The
requirements
rigor,
will be.
the rigor, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, to your point, they keep on finding, so they're digging. One could interpret that as bad news, I think it's just, it shows the thoroughness of what they're doing.
No, I wasn't
No,
trying
I
to
mean,
judge it, I was just saying that the fact is that there are unknowns that are being.
There are, those, but the proof, talk about proof statements, we have to have enough of those that,
Yeah,
to support the futuristic risk assessment.
Yep.
Yeah, it's important. How do you think the risk work gets folded into the reuse work? This is kind of a question for both work streams. What, how and when, it's early, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's, if residential standards are achieved, almost anything that people have said they would be interested in is doable. In other words, nobody's looking to, sink a shaft down there or something. If you can do housing, you can certainly do recreation. You can certainly do town facilities, you can do, the stuff the light plant's interested in. Unfortunately, I think only, Carrie and Carl have seen our summary notes. I'm sorry they didn't come together today, but, to me, I haven't heard anything you couldn't do there with a residential standard as being likely. I think the only issue to me is the perception issue and the fact that I don't think we should do only affordable housing. That it's gotta be mixed use if we do housing. Because, we're not saying, you're poor, you live in this site.
yeah, I've been thinking about it in terms of least restrictive use for the different areas of the site, so the least restrictive use is protected with other uses. And we did specifically ask Rue to identify in their work any uses that would be essentially prohibited. They're not ones that are being contemplated now, but something like a subsistence farmer, where someone
Yeah,
grows everything that they eat at the site, which probably isn't a good idea.
What about wind turbines? I mean, would they, pilings for those go down too deep?
probably, but I think that's not an issue, because what's come up with the light plant is solar/batteries, not wind turbines, and I think part of that is there's a big hill behind it, so it's not a great place to put a turbine anyway.
But also, my understanding is that it is still possible to dig below 10 feet with the necessary, soil management plan that would get approved and.
Part of the institution.
Well, we haven't heard that anywhere. I mean, I think if the light plant could have the site, their priorities are solar/battery.
Might somebody else come in with a wind option? Because I've heard actually, I don't know so little about it, but I've heard that the hill might actually be an elevation that would be.
Well, if you could put it up all the way up, but that's the part that's currently conservation, right? That the strip that runs around the edge of the property is the top of the ridge.
Mm.
So that gets into a different issue.
I think to get back to your question, Paul, in terms of the actual risk issues and legality and reuse, there are procedures to allow for whatever we want to do for digging below 10 feet, for example, as Carl was just saying. One of the institutional controls is that person, it's been delineated, it's like, don't dig, dig safe, right?
Yeah.
Been delineated, it has to be uniquely remediated before you can put your whatever there, so in the hard risk terms. It's not a insurmountable problem.
No, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, one of the institutional controls on vapor intrusion, which is number 5. It doesn't deal necessarily with depth of digging, but because if you're gonna put any structure over it, then it has to be tested for vapor intrusion. My understanding is, I could be right, EPA does the testing, it does the mitigation, but that the town has to make sure that that's part of the plan of putting a building in a certain area.
We're also fortunate in that the contaminants are not volatile. So vapor intrusion is a lesser part of the risk profile, as I understand it at the moment.
Well, you do have volatiles in the soil, they're deep. They're still there. Whether they get into the surface or not. Question. Anyway, for a later date, any other comments or questions? You can see how we're naturally getting into how the pieces are gonna affect.
I think it's useful to do that, but we all have to
Yeah,
walk the front end. It's good to hear these perspectives.
Let me add one thing, and this comes from the research that Pam and Carrie and I are doing with other communities. Several communities have all said that the DEP ends up being the police of the institutional controls, in essence. They're the ones who come and check and make sure the wells are working, et cetera. So in terms of these remediation plans, the dig safe, the risk profile issues, there's gonna be some legal overlap between them and reuse and how, and the oversight of the institutional controls. And the other communities with which I've talked, and it's 5. DEP ends up being the agency that oversees the obedience to the institutional control.
yeah, I'm not
I've
sure.
heard that. What I've heard is that the legal right to place the deed restrictions on that, the notices of activity and use is through DEP, not through EPA. But the actual, I'm not sure the monitoring, like at Devon's, I spoke to someone familiar with Devon's, and the actual monitoring there is primarily being done by the Army.
Probably depends on each site. So I talked to the 2 different Woburn sites, 3 different sites in Salem, and the Ashland site. And just because, remember we said that they're not all going to be apples and apples?
Right.
Just because they had been developed and which agency was involved in what, state was way deeply involved in both of the Woburn sites. But I just want to put on the table that there's an additional factor in there in terms of who's going to be overseeing the institutional controls that will bear on legality and reuse.
So, I'm not sure that this is accurate. Kara raised her hand to ask her for clarification, even though it's public comment in a second. The town, if requires, will have to sign a notice of activity use annul.
If it requires the site.
That makes it, the town is responsible for maintaining the institutional controls. I do know, talking with Bruce, is that they're on the side, we're not gonna be alone in that. If somebody scratches the cap,
I think that there are different institutional controls that. get
Excuse me?
required. I'm not sure, like, the notice of activity and use limitation. Cover certain things, but like the monitoring wells and right, there's gonna be ongoing oversight of that, that's And that's not necessarily gonna be the town, right?
Might have been the PR, the
Yeah.
Army.
I don't know,
Well,
my,
I don't know.
my reading of documents is there's still uncertainty as to how the monitoring is done, because it hasn't really the full plan hasn't been developed yet, is my interpretation.
Okay, so Carol, I'm gonna ask you the same, we need some clarity on this, because I know there's a concern amongst some in the select board that the institutional controls. You know, are potential liability if they're not managed properly, and then the town is responsible for maintaining the institutional controls, how they do that. And what the oversight is, and whether it's DEP police or not, I don't know. Kara, do you have any comments on any of this?
Yes, I do. So one, I think this is a big topic, right? As you caught onto, institutional controls have a lot of pieces to them. The notice of activity use limitation is a Massachusetts specific institutional control that's going to go on the site, right? So there'll be deed restrictions potentially on the site. That's a legalese. And then, so the NAUL, that is done through the state. The state is like the signing off agency on that. It's not EPA. That said, on some Superfund sites, the states have a larger role on it because they are actually managing the site's remedy in operation and maintenance. So this kind of post-remedy phase. Nuclear Metals is not one of those sites, since it's not, those are sites that were initially funded through EPA, right? So at this site, the state will sign off on the NAUL. They'll be like the ones to institute it essentially on the site. The property owner has to, I'm gonna use the word maintain, right? So you need to not go against anything that's written in the NAUL. So it says, don't disturb monitoring wells, don't disturb the monitoring wells. But the operation and maintenance is separate from that. And that's the part that's done by the PRP, the private parties, right? In this case, it's DeMaximus who's currently doing that. But if at one point, if the Army, Texatron would come up with a new company, it would be a new company, but that's the PRPs. That said, I think this is kind of like a separate topic that we can really delve into with a lot of details. And I'm happy to do that and bring a state counterpart to have that conversation. So at any point that you want to, let me know, and we can kind of break down how it works in Massachusetts.
So we're gonna have to come to that very clear statement of what the town's obligation is to maintain the institutional control. It's obviously related to reuse. In developing reuse, we can't mess around with the various things in the institutional controls. We have to make sure.
So I should kick Kara, I had a follow-up question on that, because I just reading today through your comments on the institutional control design draft that the Maximus put together. And you made reference to like an annual audit or inspection that would be done. And my understanding is that would be by the Maximus or by the responsible. Is that, yeah, okay.
Correct. So right. So they're in charge of that kind of day-to-day maintenance of the site. The property owner, if it were to be the town, their job would be just maintaining whatever the restriction is. So if the restriction says don't drink groundwater, right? Don't put in groundwater wells, you're not putting in groundwater wells. And you're meeting that standard. You're not doing the work to maintain the site.
Right, and the town will have to designate some department, some person who's responsible for that.
And that there'll have to be issues associated with any permitting and new development to ensure new owners.
Well,
Use
Yeah,
restriction and.
the permit, but the execution of the permitting as well, yeah, make sure it's something. Yeah.
Kara, I may follow up with you to clarify this, because I'm just trying to understand the operational side for the town as owner. And what that would require in terms of staffing and costs, so I may follow up with you to talk in a little more detail. Yeah.
And Karen, may I
Please do.
ask one other question? My sense,
Sure.
for example, from Salem was they had a property they acquired for development, they couldn't develop it, it ended up being a parking lot. DEP comes in every once in a while to check their paperwork to make sure they're behaving well, so the town's responsible for not messing with the surface of the parking lot, but there's a regulator checking up on them. It would, getting clarity on whatever that would be appropriate for our site would be part of what Carlos needs to know. Is there regulatory oversight that we need to be aware of?
Yeah,
Fine.
that's a question I'd have to follow up on. I'm not aware that at most sites, the DEP kind of comes in and inspects them on their own. That inspection falls on the private party to do that work. So that might be a site, again, that was a fund-led site, which means EPA paid for the initial cleanup. Those sites get transferred to the state, and then the state is in charge of the future operation and maintenance of those sites for the remedy aspects.
Is it, Karen, is it it's the PRPs in the consent decree have specific responsibilities related to institutional controls, is that?
Yes,
is it-
yep.
That's my understanding too, and that's what you articulated before, that are enforceable under the consent decree, right?
Correct, right. They own the site liability in the sense, right, that below ground contamination forever. So they need to keep managing that under the consent decree.
To the extent that they are in existence forever.
I mean, it's the US Army, so, and the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
So they'll be in existence. If they're not, we have a bigger problem on our hands.
Maybe not.
Well, I think, I'm not sure you're saying the same thing. The PRPs have the responsibility for contamination in perpetuity that they put there, but that they don't have responsibility for managing the institutional controls. That's the only side, correct?
So they have the responsibility of the operation and maintenance of the site. So maintaining the remedy on the site and maintaining that, the wells are in place. The owner has the responsibility of making sure that the institutional controls or the nulls are not
Right.
not broken,
Right.
not gone against,
Yeah.
do something against them.
I want
Complied
to
with.
separate, the O and M, which is a continuation of remediation
Right.
from the
Right.
institutional control. Those are parallel streams. The PRPs have the O and M, the town has the institutional controls with whatever oversight or not.
But I think this is a bigger kind of topic that would be helpful to.
It is.
They're interrelated.
Yeah, they are.
Well, they're definitely related. What we're doing here, we're kind of this is great. We're scratching the surface on more information that we're going to need to have. To our earlier discussion, to kind of converge on our recommendation. And we have to map out how to get that information.
Yeah.
So we're kind of getting into the, Carl and Carrie, anything else on the?
Well, this is a big issue on the operations and maintenance thing, so there was a meeting last Thursday I met with, along with Chris and Megan, with the town departments on the series of questions we developed around capital costs, maintenance costs. If this town is to acquire the site, what would be borne by the town, what would be borne by private parties? And one of the sort of next steps that sort of emerged that, a number of town departments said, we could estimate like what it would cost to extend electric service, what it would cost, for septic system perhaps. But we need a scenario for what it would be, because it's gonna vary depending upon what gets built there. So for the purpose of sort of coming up with a potential cost to the town and for infrastructure needs and operating needs, if it acquired the site, I think we're gonna need to have some sort of scenarios. They're not actual reuse scenarios that we're gonna recommend, but sort of a tool to help get some estimates for what the potential cost could be. And given the timing, if we need to get that to town departments and then they have to do some cost estimating, ideally it would be good if we could agree to what those would be at our next meeting. And I thought with maybe I'd sit down with Rich and Gary, and we would talk, we'll look over some of the notes and think about what might be 2 or 3 scenarios that we could visit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to do that. My concern is I'm not sure there are a lot of pure scenarios. In other words, I think there's some recreation plus some, plus some power and light, plus some housing, or
Right.
recreation plus town facilities. And I'm not at this point prepared to say what I think, and
Right,
we may never be able to,
right, yeah,
by June, say what we think ought to go there.
yeah, well, I don't,
But if you wanna, I mean, I think we're far enough along, we could throw up 3 or 4 scenarios that would involve the town plus others,
right.
and then you can see if they can cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of see it as what's the downside risk to the town? So if you think of what might be a more intensive use on the site, that would require more of an infrastructure investment. So if a new recreation center was built, that was 30,000 square feet, well, you need to have, the town to have to extend water service, you're gonna have to extend electric. And similarly on the housing side, what might be necessary for some, especially on the septic side, that's gonna influence the septic system considerably. So, it would be sort of say that, here's the potential exposure for the town financially for the infrastructure costs.
I think, we had a little email exchange in this, I think. The base costs are roads and sewage and for whatever development, there's some basic. Infrastructure costs, so I think those are relatively independent of exactly what happens where. We're gonna have to put certain amount of roads, a certain amount of stormwater control. And we're gonna have to estimate those, because those are probably, it really doesn't depend on exactly what's done at different areas.
Well, that's not what that town department is telling.
Well,
And those are the people we're asking to make the estimate.
well, I think you're gonna have to give them a couple of, scenarios for that.
Right, yeah, we don't even want.
Now, the next level.
Yeah.
Like, do we put playing fields, and how much do those cost? I think
Yeah.
you defer, those are part of the post
Right.
decision planning. and
Yeah,
budget.
no, I'm talking about the infrastructure, sort of infrastructure and the maintenance of the infrastructure. That's not the actual building of the town facility.
Carl, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Does the reuse plan, which a lot of public input and work went into, provide raw material for concocting a few scenarios that allow you to start to have these more detailed conversations?
Uh,
Not recommendations,
right.
but ideas about how it might
I
be.
don't think
used.
I don't think it has enough.
Okay.
I had.
You had like 4 scenarios in the StarMet committee report.
But I can't tell them. I don't know, I can go back and look, but I don't think it has like the number of bedrooms.
No, that's probably true. Not square
Right.
footage, number of bedrooms.
Or the square footage of a recreation center.
Yeah.
They've asked questions, they're
And
asking.
that's sort of the level of detail
They're asking.
that they were asking
Okay.
for.
Thank you, that's
And I
fine.
also think there's some things in there that, at least our
Yeah,
explorations say probably aren't gonna happen on the site. I mean, I haven't heard anybody yet say, oh, we want a big, retail complex or office complex there.
and I think this mostly impacts a future use in which the town would acquire it for town use. I mean, most of the costs, if part of the site is used for private development, most of the infrastructure costs will ultimately be borne by the developers or the occupants, of that development. But
to solve this conundrum, I think you guys should come together and come up with a plausible scenario.
Right.
And then present that to the town departments,
I
so.
think we
so
gotta
that-
have two
two or three, I would say give them.
Two or three.
a
plausible.
range of intensity of town services required.
Yeah,
If it's all solar and batteries, you don't need a lot of septic.
yeah, no, that's, yeah.
And if you can do that, that satisfies the town.
Yeah.
So, it's not perfect, but
Yeah,
that's one of the assumptions we get, of many you have to go through. Go ahead.
Carrie, I think Carrie gets the credit for this way back cautioning us to be able to project forward more too?
Yes.
Is that?
Well, what's been interesting, I've talked or tried to talk with people at three towns. Walpole, Mansfield and Fairhaven. And my questions are about the process and the way the town residents, received it and what inputs did you have as you made a decision to acquire or not, et cetera. What's interesting is the very different one, Fairhaven said, what? We wouldn't want to have anything to do with it. But that was just the recollection of somebody who was kind of sort of paying attention, but actually talking to somebody who was involved in the decision. Why would we bring it to town meeting was sort of as close as I got to that. It's a time lapse and turnover in staff in a lot of places. In Walpole, I have read a lot of town report kind of stuff that's on their website. I have had some conversation with some people. In their case, they had a very careful study of what might be possible on the property, but they acquired it without a specific plan. And it was apparently a well-studied, very public involved process. And then the last of the towns that I've had any real contact with is Mansfield. There is apparently one person still on staff in the town that was there when they were going through this, and he was in the Public Works Department. Now he's the Director of Public Works. And his recollection of the decision process, and again, I still want to find out more about it, was, of course we took the land. Why wouldn't we take the land? Why would we want somebody else to have the land? It was a tax lien situation and they took it and then they thought about what they might do with it.
Was it an NPL site?
That kind of language, I have notes that I haven't transcribed, and he said a few times that I could follow up in some old town reports, and on the website of the town, you can see town reports back to 2020, and then there's a link to older ones, which is not working. So that has been reported to their IT department. But Mansfield, which this report, which I have read, is published in May 2005, prepared for the town of Mansfield by a private consultant. And it's a very careful and very detailed study of what is possible or potentially possible on various pieces of the site. And it makes some recommendations in more in the sense of you can't do this here or you shouldn't do that there. But here's what works very well. And they're just now starting to implement. They've waited for the cleanup to be done before they're actually doing it. Yes, yeah. Hathaway Patterson, which was a lumber processing factory that had been there for a long time. Sort of the manufacturing site that came through because the railroad was already there. And all they have used it for in all that time was to parking for public works vehicles and put some office space in what had been, he sort of described it as, well, it was like the watchman's house. So somebody was living on the property and then they've just improved it to the point that it can be used for office. And they're really just at this point beginning to get serious about what they will actually do, other than one section of the land which was probably the least contaminated, was sold to a developer, and it's mixed housing with, one of the things that's on the table now, because the railroad comes through and it's near the town line, Fox Road on the other side and Mansfield on the side, would be, and it's surrounded on the Mansfield side residential neighborhood. Not far from highway, but with no easy access from the highway without going through residential area. And they're thinking about, not recommending yet, but one of the possibilities was a multi-level parking garage with retail and community service kind of stuff on the lower level. In conjunction with MBTA and other things.
But there's no shortage of ideas.
No, but it's just the range of why would we want it to, why wouldn't we? Of course we'll take it and then we'll figure it out.
Carl, getting to answering your questions for the town, which is our charge.
So,
Broadly, Carrie's feedback raises something that I took out of the 5 towns that I've interrogated. We won't know. We won't
Right.
have any clarity.
Right, yeah, it doesn't surprise.
So these scenarios is the best way to go. We're gonna have to leave it open. What it's gonna get used for and what the infrastructure needs will have to be ballpark.
Right, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to Gary, for in the reuse thing, we put together kind of high level concepts. This next iteration have to be a little sharper than that. Because you get some really, we didn't have the feedback that you've gotten from various players, and the town is a lot more. Entities in town are a lot more interested in the site now than they were 2 years ago, so you have a lot more good data. You're gonna have to convert that data into 2 or 3 scenarios they're all assumptions that the
Right.
public works can cost out.
right,
Because in the report, you're gonna have that ballpark.
Right.
Yeah,
I think it's,
high, medium, low.
Right.
That's all we can do.
right,
in
no, I
this
think,
report.
yeah, I think from the select board's point of view, it's the question they might want to know, okay. From a financial point of view, we may have to pay something for the site. And then we're gonna have to make some investment in the site to make it usable. How large are those numbers? Right, that would be a factor, I'm sure, even if it's, in a ballpark, that's something.
But we need to deal with if we can acquire the site for
Right,
X dollars, that's over
Right.
here. But, it's the development part of it. Ballparks, because
Right.
you're right, we're not gonna have.
right,
In fact, one of our recommendations, if the town was gonna move forward, is that the next 2 years, I was approached by somebody in FinCom at the chair breakfast right over here, said, you guys have to put in a capital budget. I looked at it like, okay, he said, because if you don't, I will. I said, be my guest. Be my guest, because it's a 5-year capital budget. At some point.
Yeah.
Another group's gonna have to do that, but that doesn't happen until
right,
the post-task force stage.
Right.
When the real planning, and real capital budget happens. So, I mean.
Yeah.
At this stage, we have to give the select board ballpark ideas about use and costs.
Right.
On the reuse and management side, and some more sharp edge. Costs on the legal side,
sure,
the sharp edge stuff, and morphing into that conversation, I can do that.
Just a question if I might.
Go ahead.
Have any town departments asked to be withdrawn from these discussions? No interest, no foreseeable use?
Well, of course, nobody talked to the schools, but I don't think,
And I almost mentioned it tonight at the meeting I just left, and I thought I'd wait and let you guys do it, but it
Well,
could be
you
brought
know,
to that.
we didn't seek them out, both because we understood there were 3 sites that would no longer be educational, and because frankly, nobody had brought it up the last time around.
I met with the school committee on the reuse, I gave them, when we started the reuse committee briefing, and there was like a reply, oh, that's interesting. But it was all about kind of recreational.
They also have the Peabody property that they can
We have
focus on
Peabody
yeah.
property
pretty
that is
quickly
gonna be
before
surplus,
this one.
and we have declining enrollments, and we
Yeah.
have capital projects that are already pretty ambitious, so.
And you've got,
Yeah.
and they've got Ripley, which is a sizable site that has no educational use at the moment. I know there are offices, but
It has some educational use and it has huge infrastructure needs.
yeah, right. I mean, I'm not saying
It's
it's,
a failing building.
as a housing advocate, I look at that nice big level area and go,
Okay, it's 8:15. I'd like to get.
I was gonna add one more, if I could, and that's on, following up a little bit more on the Walpole situation. That they have developed their site, but not until they had owned it for some time, and more studies had been done. And it is primarily town facilities, council on aging, police, fire, I think it's just police actually, that they ended up doing. And the other side, which is where the continuing pumping and so forth along, is near a river, is, trails and a little bit of overflow parking. Really up across the street, so it's primarily town, but that is sort of centrally located. And it sounds like the decision for what to use it for had at least as much to do with the location, and what surrounded it as it did with actual contamination or, what else might have been.
But they didn't know what they were gonna use it for when they acquired it.
They did,
Ted-
they had a study sort of going on of what the town needs. Which sort of, it feels to me from what I have heard talking to a couple of people and what I've read, is that they kind of overlapped. And so one decision benefited from the other, but the study of what the town needs was not necessarily started just because here's this piece of property that is.
I want to
Yeah, I
end the
understand.
discussion here on that. I want to kind of get it turned to the,
Yes,
I mean, you got 15 minutes or 2 hours worth of discussion, I'm not sure.
Can I ask one very quick question? Do we want a scenario where the town is not acquiring, but we can sort of anticipate what a private developer would do? And then ask, does the town have to spend any money here?
I think that, I think that. I don't know, that's a good question, let me think about it. I don't
Okay.
think
Yeah, let's table that. I think maybe, but certainly
that- Think about that.
the acquisition and reuse side, we need those scenarios. So there are two topics on the agenda. One's on the legal update and the document management discussion. I'm not sure we're gonna get to the latter, although it's germane. So do you have, how much?
So, yeah, I apologize for my late arrival.
No, you're on time.
You're-
So if you want to pull up the slides that I sent to you earlier today, they're on this, so although you may have them as well. It's not- No. It's a really good phone, yeah. And I have hard copy here. I would headline this with not a lot of new information here. Rather, more importantly, this is information that now has received the scrutiny of town council. So we feel much more confident in it. Not that we thought that prior information was suspect in any way, but given the sensitive nature of the negotiations that are someday going to unfold, we wanted it from the lips of town council.
So the memo that you sent, I'm not distributing that because that's the first time I saw it. I don't know.
Correct.
We don't want to put in the meeting packet and not figure out how to. It's kind of part of the subject discussion of document management, so.
So I tried to synthesize what Mina Macarius has shared with us.
It's on the screen here if you want
Very good. And what you see here first is the slide that Paul was kind enough to pull up some weeks ago. And that was the status as we knew it from the reuse report. And you're going to see very similar information that follows with a little bit of updating. The first updating you're getting, stop me anytime you want, is that, bless you, is that ownership is technically held by, or title is held by StarMet to this day. And yet we know that it's defunct, so it's a curious situation.
It's a very important situation,
Yeah.
because we had heard that nobody owns it, but in fact, they still own the land, there's still officers,
Correct.
and do we know who the officers are?
There are two known officers, yes.
So,
And there's a history of attempts by our town
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
to them, and they are hard to get to.
Hey, Paul, I don't know, I'm not seeing the thing, so Terry might want to be, she might be asking about the
I'm not sharing this,
screen sharing, I don't see it on Zoom.
just a second.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify, are you screen sharing this or you're not?
Yes, we are.
Sharing these slides.
Oh, okay,
I'm sorry.
there
I
we
didn't-
go. Now I see it.
So here you've got, on this slide, the private liens, very consistent with the earlier information. And these are the, again, private liens with the big one and uncertain one, that of Citizens Bank. And we do have, through town council, the bankruptcy court being sought out. That's been underway for a few weeks now, so I'm hopeful it won't take too long. Notice, and here's where I'll turn to those with legal training, the footnote, discharged as a matter of law, not as a matter of record. We're comfortable, this means they've been discharged, but there is this technical aspect to it.
It must mean that
Yeah.
the law on its face.
I think
says
they
that
no
it
longer
is-
exist, or their statute of limitation discharge.
It is, yeah, the calendar ran it out, yes.
There's no recorded statement.
So no new numbers here.
So your footnote number 1 applies to each of the 3 that says discharge as a matter of law.
Yes, and I referenced it on Atlantic because it's the first time it comes up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. And
That's
then,
the one thing you mentioned, ownership and bankruptcy, so correct me if I'm wrong. The Starbucks filed for bankruptcy, but those proceedings were never finalized. So, which creates an ambiguity, legal ambiguity, but as far as bankruptcy, but also on ownership, there is still an owner. And
there is still an owner,
and
yes.
Since the corporation's defunct, but the officers still have some ownership
Why wasn't it
responsibility.
finalized?
What's that?
Do you know why it wasn't
I
finalized?
don't know why it wasn't finalized, it was dismissed, somebody, do you know? Yeah,
It's an open question,
some question,
so that town council's looking into it.
so we don't know, so it can affect the mechanism. that the
Yes.
town has.
And to oversimplify greatly, it means that someday negotiations would commence or resolutions would have to be had primarily with EPA, DEP, but also Starmet NMI is still in the mix. And how that title would be taken and transferred in relative to negotiations with EPA or DEP, I can't speak to it, I don't know yet.
Nobody knows that.
This slide, I think, is really important.
And this is,
The
yeah,
third bullet is really important.
this is interesting, this does present some new information. First, we have the EPA 23 million, which is not a cap. We'll know what the number is when we sit down, but that's what it is to our knowledge today, no surprise to you. Also, we are no further along on DEP because we don't even think DEP knows. And we don't think they will even try to determine what they might hold by way of a lien until they're asked. And then finally, this number has increased significantly, threefold since you saw a previous Concord number, now approaching $1 million, 977 as of a few days ago.
That's a very significant number. Because, yeah, I'm not an attorney, but they're foreclosure options based on $1 million for the tax. Let me just say, I think everybody knows this, first bullet, and I don't want any response from EPA or anybody at this point, but we have had correspondence from EPA that is negotiable, dischargeable in certain circumstances. So theoretically, that can go away. We don't know the exact terms, but I think that 23 million may not go completely away, but that's not a bigger hurdle as it seems. It's still a hurdle. But, so we don't know the details of that.
And not only is it a hurdle, the legal stream is working closely with the town, who is working closely with council, because they're now anticipating that should they negotiate on the town's behalf, they're going to want to have that exclusive accountability, town council for that. And they want us to use some caution about what we do that would look like pre-negotiation conversations. They want us to be careful. more power to them, I think.
And I think the idea there is that, and this is the responsibility of the town leadership and the town manager's office, but that the voice would be through town council on all this stuff would be through the town council. So that the conversations about these issues would be handled in close coordination with town council and not exclusively through town.
I agree. But you know this, we need some more information on, not negotiating, we need some more information on what are the parameters around this. And-
Exactly.
and
Yes, so,
And so, EPA has offered to sit down with us, with or without me, to pass that information.
and Mina knows this, he's prepared to enter into those conversations with the caveat that he wants to not do anything that equates with formal negotiations, but rather stay on the fact-finding side.
Absolutely.
As you well know.
And the task force needs that information. If Mina doesn't feel comfortable being there, I think he should be there, but we're not negotiating. It's
So
just-
he's moving in that direction. He's also working on a recommended pathway. We've seen several pathways that could be followed, different menu approaches, if you will, toward acquisition. He's found some of the previous work to be helpful, but he wants to add some detail to it for us. And we've told him well and good. And then another area of attention is going to be his take on risk mitigation that will intersect with other work around this table around risk mitigation.
Legal risk mitigation.
When you say he has previous pathways toward acquisition that he needs to flesh out, what does that mean? What?
Skio
Previous
did a very nice,
acquisition?
Skio did a very nice visual of the different action steps that could take place that would achieve acquisition and B, do so in a way that would reduce future liabilities.
Okay. So it wasn't
So,
something
but
that
my-
town previously did, it's Skio's guidance.
But how do you, what goes ahead of what, do we resolve the
Steps.
liens? What's step number one? What does a comfort letter fit, how does that fit in with an amendment to a consent decree if you decide to do that? How does a prospective purchaser deal fit into all of the above? And how does that work at the facts of our site? And I think that's we're asking to be teased out in much greater detail than we have in the past, so that we have a better sense of, how to advise the town and where to.
Yeah, those details would be awesome. I just wondered what the source of that
And
background starting place was.
There's a chart that I can share with that Skio provided to legal.
Awesome.
And that chart is a very general overview, which will be. fleshed out.
Tailored.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me just describe the chart if I may. Skio described the three pathways. Essentially, one is that we buy the site outright. The second is that we foreclose on the site tax, and the third one is you take it by eminent domain. Under each one of those are various liability protection strategies and for example, the lien discussion. I don't think it's independent of that. It flows out of which pathway is especially the governmental pathway. So there are known pathways. Mina has to decide which one is,
And those
given
path-
everything is the most
and those
advantageous.
pathways are much more elaborate than has been previously explained. So,
I mean, there's also come up with some potential other pathways. Aside from those that, we've talked about, are not feasible for them. So. That's what we need, the examination, of what is the pathway, because then that starts the process. And under all of those are things you've heard about, BFPP, the benefit,
bona
Bona fide
fide purchaser,
and what's required in that, and there's.
it's a status,
And
and
then
then
there's-
acquire and then protect.
Well, there's a
Potential
status, but
purchaser
there's
agreement.
a status, but there's a statutory status, but there's also an agreement that you can undergo with various parties that would be protective, and then there are comfort letters, which are less than, lesser documents that EPA can give us that can help bolster our liability protections. and there's an amendment to the consent decree that could occur. These are just little blocks and pieces of things that are gonna have to be put together in a way that makes sense, and each one of them requires probably negotiations with various parties, state, DOJ, EPA, you know, maybe even the parties of the consent decree. That's the kind of thing that needs to come together.
But-
That's what Mina is working very.
The important point here is that no negotiations are gonna take place until the select board decides whether they want negotiations to take place. So our recommendations are gonna have to be based on the potential most advantageous pathway. We won't know if any of those negotiations can be brought to fruition.
Of course not, we recommend the pathways that might be best for the town,
Yeah, but we know what's involved, and we have to,
and we describe them.
I mean, right, so, but, you
Yeah,
know,
there you go.
we want to keep, you know,
Simple.
every time I hear the word negotiation, I want to caution them, nothing we're gonna do in any conversation, anything to do with negotiations. Even in our recommendations, but based on what the recommendations are, we may not. Through me to describe the potential pathway of negotiations. After our report is done, that's,
And not only does it
Right.
get complex because we have multiple parties involved, it gets further complex and time consuming because these are governmental entities that move at their respective speeds. We've got that going on as well. We've got the cost factor going on, always.
Cost being the cost of the town to budget the required support, yeah.
Yeah, precisely. This really suggests to us that our care in putting this on Mina and saying, you are the one that holds the bag for the town, and he's willing to take that on without plowing new ground when he can use previous material, but vetting it, I think is gonna serve us well, it has so far.
one thing we discussed briefly before he came in, I don't want to stir up a hornet's nest here again, but I really think that remember, we're in the information gathering mode. The possibility that we could have a kind of a workshop, which involves Mina and maybe the whole task force, but Mina, the chair, you guys, Kat, with West, to hear from them, just get information about what their experiences were. I think that would help to inform the process. We don't have to take any advice. We can reject all advice, but I think we have to listen to those. Because when I listened to, and I had a discussion with Kat just for my own understanding. She explained that chart to me and I said, oh, wow, okay, I didn't realize that, so,
And I think with each of these action steps, it may not result in a yes or a no on what we want to achieve, it might be a partial.
Absolutely.
And that's where it gets even more
Yeah.
complex.
we are still in the information gathering mode as a task force. I think Mina's still in information gathering mode. As a town council, and we're in the information gathering mode, and so the more information we can have from more parties.
I think we should be, careful about opening up, a workshop without doing a lot of information gathering and pointed questioning and development of our thinking, because that is, I think we're learning a lot as we go along, and I think that premature, just opening up stuff is going to be a lot of wheel spinning. I have a feeling.
Or it might imply expectations and directions on our part prematurely.
I have to disagree with that, Kurt. I mean, let's say, let's call this seminar, we could listen to what somebody's saying and say, we don't have to say anything. There's no expectations.
It'd be not unlike hearing your experience in Walpole, yeah.
Yeah, for me, there's no harm, I've been through so many litigation issues, no harm in listening, even if we were opposing parties, even if we were in litigation, which we're not. Listening to the other party never hurts. It never hurts. You don't have to make any decisions. You don't have to make any decisions.
It's
based
an
on that.
important thing to talk about and to see how we interact with various people who might be involved in these workshops. I think we need to design and
Okay.
think about those things.
I agree. I'm just opening up the topic here, because this is a very complex topic, and the more information that we have, we need to make informed decisions. We need to ask Mina the right questions.
We also need to know when we know enough of a particular set of informers, let's say Steel, that they've given us what they can give us, and we're going deeper now. And
Yeah.
that's something that I frankly think may be occurring. So, how much we lead to the various parties is another issue.
Okay.
So here we have the magnitude of the leads in front of us in the different parties.
So the lead, I mean, the biggest thing for me on this, even though the EPA lien looks big, is that the Citizens Bank lien. We don't know exactly how much that is and whether that could actually be discharged through some legal action by the town.
And
It's
DEP.
possible that could be, if you
Sorry.
just,
And the,
it's possible that the Citizens Bank might be
how,
discharged.
how
somehow.
far away are we from that, being discharged by time? By
So
statute of
you're talking
limitations?
The citizens.
This
Citizens?
is,
No.
I think if you look in the meeting packet,
Yeah.
it was the title
title
search, which had this information. And I think it does, yeah, it has. It has the termination dates in there, I believe. That was as an example, the $4 million,
For Mass Industrial.
yeah, that expired it's September 5th, 1983.
I think that was when it was recorded.
Oh, no, it expired by statute
It's
of
been
limitations.
expired.
I'm sorry, it's dated at 83, statute of limitations. Statute, expired by statute of limitations. Whatever that means,
Yeah.
exactly.
But,
That's
if the bank would expire in a year or two, and then
That's what I
it
mean.
might not be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking
Statute
at
of limitations,
that,
simply that it's statute says it's at
This
a
is-
certain date,
Right.
it's no longer.
This is because I'm new to all
They had an
this.
exercise there. but-
Is there no lien for the 250, some portion of the 250 million that EPA is spending on this now? Or is there some decision that says this is a taxpayer expense, we're not looking to recover it?
Well, the PRPs are paying the cleanup, they're bearing the cost, this 23 million is the federal cost of, my understanding, above and beyond for staff time. That are not recovered.
Okay,
by
so
PRP, so the two,
the PRPs being energy in the Army. I
yeah,
think they have
that's the
money.
major cost, that's not part of this.
There is, not to get into the weeds, but there is something called the windfall lien, which we don't want to be. That is,
We make too much money.
yeah, if we make too much money, if we buy or acquire, and we make too much money, the EPA may, extract. the windfall.
Which might have happened in one of Kerry's examples where they sold off a part for.
But I think that's one of the,
But that's not, I don't think
one of the
that's
kinds of things I wanted to.
it's wrapped up to the $23 million loan. So, my understanding is that, EPA doesn't want the town to acquire the site and flip it.
Exactly, that's what
And
a
then-
windfall lien would.
Right, so that would be in
That
part of
would be-
negotiating the $23 million up, we'd have to agree.
Yeah, I'm just saying that
Agree to
there is the concept of a windfall lien and an interest on the part of the US government not to have us flip it and make
You
it
would
like.
bring a real lead on ourselves.
I don't think it's a big deal because we would be sitting on a whole bunch of money that we
Right,
should be giving.
we're the beneficiaries
Yeah.
of the windfall.
Yeah, right, yeah, I don't have a problem, it's just another,
So that
one of
gives,
the
it's one of the
permutations.
topics we need more information on, so, look, it's getting late in the topic of the documents, the reason why that's on there, let me just briefly, there are a lot of documents floating around, you have it, I have it, you guys have it. For our own purposes in sharing, we probably need to pull the documents together. For transparency, of our efforts, we're a public entity, I think that information should be available. A lot of it's in the meeting packet, which is why I put stuff in the meeting packets, but there are things that are outside the meeting packets that we have to, and I want to talk about this at the next meeting. What are the types of documents that we have that should be managed or should be managed? So, Carl, if you receive a document, you think that should be part of our repository, it probably shouldn't be on the Google Drive. And Chris, I don't know if the town has for other committees has set up what for other committees as far as document management.
I think it mostly runs through staff and staff liaisons, but there are definitely many committees that have set up, Google Drives, that's an option. I mean, that, all the documents are public records unless they're confidential, so, there's options.
And then this on the legal stuff, I think the management of the documents coming in from MENA and going out to MENA are being managed through the town manager's office and not through,
Right.
not through us.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the confidential information, like the title searches. It's a public document, like EPA gave us that title search.
Yeah.
So, and, the information that SKIO provided in the legal folder,
Yes, no, that's fine.
that's public information, and the things we don't want to share. I think I want a richer discussion of this, I'm getting a little, not nervous, and we have a lot of information here that eventually somebody might ask for. We have to make sure we know where it is when we're asked for it, right?
Yeah,
I've been involved in projects that go on for 3 years and nobody bothered to think about document management from the beginning, and, nobody knows what the documents are. I don't want to be in that position when we end this up, so I think we have to think about it.
We also have to coordinate how to use them so we can each learn from them.
Right.
Because I'm clueless about a lot of this stuff and would want to read like what happened in Walpole or
Yeah.
some legal stuff, not a lot, thank you, but right? But you have to learn from it.
But yeah, there's no, in the cases that I'm looking at, there's no one document that says, this is what happened over the 15 years.
But let me give you an example. So Pam and I and Carrie are gonna meet about this, and I've been thinking about this, right? So I got 2 town managers who oversaw the acquisitions to fill out our question list.
Mhm.
That's a documentable thing that I could share into somewhere that you guys could read.
Yeah, and so far.
No, well, maybe not you, but that's his words. Yeah.
So this would be, go ahead. Go ahead.
In response to this idea, I would advocate that we really make sure we're using the packets that you're doing very nicely right now as the first go-to place.
Sure.
One, because it's already happening, it's working, it informs our meetings, and a citizen can find them.
That's fine.
But then we've got to discuss, what about the other stuff that doesn't land in those packets?
Yeah, it may be appendix on a report, like we did for the reuse report, all the surveys, all the raw data, we put in an appendix. We may say, let's not worry about it, but it all has to appear at the end. But, as much of that goes in the packets as you're comfortable with, that's why, for example, these slides, I'm gonna amend the
Yeah,
package and
that's-
put that in.
yeah, it's great.
The other thing, on the legal side, you guys are running the show very well, but the task force has to understand some of the issues that, so when you bring up the FPP or PPA or eminent domain, we have some idea what that is. So there has to be sort of some sharing of basic information. Now, a lot of it I've shared, I've dumped a whole bunch of legal stuff on you, which you haven't read. So it's in there, but I think we all need to come up to speed on some of the legal issues. A lot of it's there already. Appendix E in the reuse report was an overview of that. So that when we have these discussions, you can ask these guys the right questions.
I think one of the things on the legal side, just my experience listening to lots of complex information in my life. When it gets closer to being real is when it gets internalized. And so I think that with respect to things like the bona fide prospective purchaser, or even idea, the comfort letter idea, we could give you a workshop or a webinar on those things. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think what you want to do is wait for us to know why we want to talk to you about this stuff. We will pay more attention. We will be more focused. Nobody's trying to hide anything from anybody, but the idea of doing an abstract what happens to me when people do that to me is I don't go there mentally until I'm ready. So I would suggest that with respect to the legal stuff, let us get to the point where we can trippingly, as Shakespeare said, speak to these issues in the context of the work
relevance,
that's relevance.
If I might add,
Yeah.
you're not asking to run the clock on this. This is exactly what we're trying to get ready to get this task force to.
Okay, always a good meeting. I think our initial discussions that you missed was sort of a brainstorming on how these pieces might come together, and that's gonna be an ongoing discussion as we learn about how these pieces fit.
We're gonna need quite a Gantt chart.
And also because Court and I talked about this earlier, and we're gonna bring it up in the context of this presentation. I did open up the notion of the scope of our inquiry beyond, what I had been saying was kind of right now kind of binary exploration, and we had a short conversation.
Yeah, and this isn't because we wanted to make this a make work exercise or just go off into the ether with ideas, but rather to make certain that if there is some novel move that we could make, we know about it. Or something to avoid, we know about it. I think you put it right. The select board would like to know, acquire yes or no? And we're gonna say, yeah, that is the central question, but there might be a lot more to it.
Yeah, there might be other pathways that we have yet to think about.
But my point was on the novel possibilities. We really have to know if they're possible.
Well, exactly, yeah,
We have to get information,
right.
Mina may have an idea, well, this is possible. But we have to figure out by talking to the stakeholders, not negotiating, is this a possibility?
And possible ain't practical.
Well, and if they say, that's not possible, that's what they said, yeah, it's possible, okay, we know it's possible.
Why might we be interested in?
Yeah, so I'm just saying,
No,
there's more information. This is why I'm keen on getting more information. Not negotiation information, because it's gonna help inform the decision, help us figure out if there are non-binding. If there are other options rather than required.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I'm very interested in what David and Carrie are finding out from these other towns. I don't know if there's any way to pull their interview notes together, like Skio helped us do with our talks with potential users.
We are meeting together to figure out exactly that, what we've
Yeah.
learned, coordinate it and figure out how to present it to you guys, to everybody, so that we all learn from it. That's, every work group is doing.
I would characterize most of what I've heard as anecdotal from people who kind of knew something about it.
Well, I mean, you could always have a, 1 through 5 as to
And-
barely believable or probable.
And Pam had mentioned that people she was trying to get in touch with weren't replying to emails and so forth, so.
We can describe the
It's-
nature of our sources and the certainty of the information as part of our reporting back to you, how we learned it, what we still do or don't know, et cetera. We're meeting, and Pam's trying to coordinate a meeting of the three of us to do exactly what you're asking.
Great.
Yeah,
I think,
and I think she had a date.
think of the final report and think about an appendix. If all this information has to go in there. And the report could be 50 pages and the appendices could be 500. But think about what information you want to put in the report as backup. Because at the front end, we're gonna have a methodology, and part of the methodology is gonna be that you talk with other towns. So where's that information?
That's fine for the report. I wanna, in my mind,
Yeah.
I wanna report back to you all so that we can think through that consensus conversation and then worry about where the hell it goes in the document.
Well, I'm worried about that. I'm not worried about it, but that would prompt you to organize it.
In a certain way, yes.
Prompt you to organize it early and get it together early, because you're gonna use it.
And it is still a work in progress, as Carrie has suggested.
What's the it? The it is, what's?
Interrogating these various towns, so we've divvied up who's calling who and how far it's gotten, and it's gotten further with some than others.
You find the person who knows something
Right,
and they
yeah.
tell you where.
And I lucked out, and they're still,
That's lossy.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do at the end of the meeting is gonna sound really unconventional, but I don't think I did a roll call vote at the beginning. of the meeting. We started writing to approval of minutes, so
you fix that in a minute, right?
the court came in late, so I'm gonna actually.
No, we're definitely looking to make sure that we had the forum, and was there anybody
We
else
had,
that was
we had
there?
the quorum, but I did not do a roll call
You
vote.
did
I
not
apologize.
specifically do a roll call.
You can
vote,
impeach
that's
me
okay.
You probably won't be-
Can we vote to make it be in the meeting now? And then-
Well, he just has to pay $50 to change the minute.
Technically, I believe the language is the secretary confirms that the following
That's
are
what you
present in
had.
person and others on Zoom.
Wow.
That's what,
So
that's
I
what's
think
in
we
his
can,
minutes.
I think we
the
can
other night
finesse it with,
From the last
Do we,
meeting.
do we have it covered, I think?
yeah.
Okay, because I was
Yeah.
sitting here saying, why are roll call vote? Anyway, meeting is adjourned, thank you.
Well, what
for-
about the? public?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there any public-
Anybody, any comments from
Terry?
the public? I don't see any hands raised. We wore you out, all of you. Thank you for sticking with us. Terry, you have comment?
Thank you. We lost you for a second, it froze, but, good meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Terry. When's our next meeting?
The 30th, January 30th.
Paul, you've got to end the meeting, it's my minutes, so when you're ready to adjourn, you just have to say D for end the meeting.
Am I gonna end the meeting? Yes, I'm gonna end the meeting after we adjourn. We are adjourned. Thank you. Good night, everybody.